Hi, thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Kate with Beautiful Light Home, and today we're going to be discussing storytelling and its importance to Waldorf education. Before I get into just a high-level overview and a few reminders of what Waldorf education is, if you're looking for a real in-depth look into the exploration of what is Waldorf education, first of all, my whole channel is basically all about Waldorf education and our journey with homeschooling using Waldorf education. But I do have a video titled, What is Waldorf Education? So if you're looking for more of a high-level overview, I really suggest you go and watch that first so you can understand this a little bit better, because a lot of this goes into the developmental stages of children. But I will just give just a brief overview and reminder of some key aspects of Waldorf education right now. So the first thing is that Waldorf education believes that children and humans are not just our minds, that we are a mind, but we're also a body and a soul or a spirit as well. And that it's called the threefold human being, and that all three aspects of humanhood essentially need to be developed and nourished. And Waldorf education seeks to develop and nourish all three aspects through their educational programs. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and it goes along with the threefold human being, is that Waldorf education, through all aspects of learning, they seek to engage the head, the hands, and the heart. And those also kind of correspond to the developmental stages that children go through. So from birth to age 7, children are primarily developing their body or their hands. That's how they're learning the best. I've talked about this before, but young children, you can see them doing so much because that is the key core aspect of what they're developing the most at that stage. It doesn't mean that they're not developing the other areas as well, the mind and the feelings, but it is the primary aspect that's being developed at that stage. And then when you switch from ages 7 through 14, there's a change in children, and instead of primarily learning through their body, they're now learning through their feelings. So we have to really take that into consideration when we're planning lessons for children from ages 7 through 14, is how can I touch them on an emotional level, and how can I engage them on an emotional level, because that's how they're going to learn best. And then it really isn't until ages 14 through 21 that the mind or the intellect is being developed the most. So when you look at Waldorf education, it seeks to meet the child where they are developmentally, and storytelling actually plays a role in all three aspects of those developmental stages. So storytelling in Waldorf education, it goes beyond just reading books. Now, reading books is absolutely important. Waldorf education does not deny that as well at all, but and it's still something that we do in our education here, especially in our homeschool. However, storytelling goes a little bit beyond that. So what is storytelling? Oh, and also the reason why I want to focus on this today is because this is like a big area of development for me, and it's an area that I've really been studying and researching over the past several weeks in preparation for our upcoming kindergarten year. Both of my children technically qualify as kindergartners. My daughter still falls into like that real early childhood education, but storytelling is big in kindergarten and Waldorf education, and through all of Waldorf education essentially. So I really want to focus on it and develop it for myself, so that we can have a really great school year this year. So what is storytelling, and how is it different than just reading books? So storytelling is where the caregiver or the teacher learns a story by heart. And I say that very specifically instead of saying memorize it. Memorizing a story is much different than telling a story by heart. By heart, you are invoking your feelings. It doesn't have to be word for word. It's just the general gist of the story that you kind of get the plot line to, and then you're telling it from an area of feeling and an area of emotion. And the amazing thing that I do want to talk about real quick is that Rudolf Steiner highlights this in his book, The Education of the Child. This is a great book, by the way, if you're interested in learning more about Waldorf education. This is from Rudolf Steiner's lectures on education, and it was before they founded the first Waldorf school. This was just some of the ideas that he had around education. But he said, when telling stories, everything depends on the art of telling. Word of mouth narration cannot therefore simply be replaced by reading. And this is why, I'll tell you right here. He says, when one speaks in parables and pictures, in these stories that we've learned by heart, it is not just what is spoken and shown that works on the hearer, but a fine spiritual stream that passes from one to the other, from the one who gives to the one who receives. If the one who tells does not have the warm feeling of belief in the parable, no impression will be made on the other. For true effectiveness, it is essential to believe in one's parables as one does in absolute realities. So you can see in Steiner's own words that you have to really believe the stories you're telling, even if it's a fairy tale. You're still telling it from this area of belief and an area of warmth and an area of feeling, because it is something almost spiritual that passes from you to the child. I could see it in my own children when I'm telling a story. Listen, we cuddle all the time and we read books together, and that still has its own warmth to it and its own connection. But telling a story is a little different. So first of all, when we tell stories, there's normally props involved. I'm going to actually post, probably the same time I'm posting this, I have a whole video on a story that I've been telling my children lately. So please feel free to check it out if you're interested to see how the props and how the story actually unfolds. But it's a little bit more magical when you're telling it from your heart and from your soul, and you connect on a soul level with your children or your students. So Rudolf Steiner also gave really great indications about what the stories should be about. So he said, from birth to age 7, he says, when telling all kinds of stories to little children before their change of teeth, which essentially is that birth to age 7 range, he says, our aim cannot be more than to awaken delight, liveliness, and a happy enjoyment of the story. So that's all we're looking for. So in those young children who are really developing their bodies, we can keep the stories short. We can engage them. Maybe I always like to engage my children in the stories by having songs and by having little repetitive things that they can recite back to me. So this way their bodies are engaged, but it's also their minds and their souls as well. So that's all we need to do for that birth to age 7. They don't have to have morals. We don't have to be teaching a lesson. It's just stories for enjoyment's sake. And that's really what I'm focusing on going into next year, because both of my children will be younger than 7. But then once we hit that 7 to 14 range, and even beyond that, but really that core area of education from ages 7 through 14, children are learning with their feelings. So he says that after age from 7 to 14, we have to remember something else in selecting material for stories. That is, that we are placing before boys and girls pictures of life that will arouse a spirit of emulation in the soul. He actually says too that he says it should not be overlooked that bad habits may be overcome completely by pointing to appropriate examples that shock or repel the child. Reprimands give but little help at best in the matter of habits and inclination. If, however, we show the living picture of a person who has given way to a similar bad habit and allow the child to see where such an inclination actually leads, this will work on the young imagination and go a long way toward uprooting the habit. The reason why I point this out is because I know myself, I've struggled with like the whole archetypes of good versus evil and all, and like, are we doing the right thing by showcasing that to our children? Because we know as adults that it's so much more nuanced than that. But from the ages of 7 to 14, children need that. They need to know the good versus evil, and because we're developing their souls and we're developing their spirits and trying to lead and nourish their spirits and help them develop a moral compass. And in order to do that, we have to showcase right from wrong, and we have to really play into that. So instead of telling them not to do something with a bad habit, instead we can invoke feelings in them based off of stories and parables that we tell. And we don't then need to sum it up with, and that's why we don't do this. Children get it. They'll get it on a deeper level because we have to give them credit for that, and that's how they're learning at that moment too. So I always think that's super interesting. In fact, Rudolf Steiner also says that it is essential that the secrets of nature, the laws of life, be taught to children not in dry intellectual concepts, but as far as possible in symbols. Parables of the spiritual connections of things should be brought before the souls of children in such a way that behind the parable they divine and feel rather than understand intellectually the underlying law in all existence. So remember, we're working on their feelings. So we don't have to necessarily describe everything in super scientific terms. Maybe you can put those into your story, but we're trying to get them. So if we're teaching them science from ages 7 through 14, we're still telling stories to them so that they can learn on an emotional level. It is a vast importance for children that they receive the secrets of nature in parables before they are brought before their souls as natural laws, and so on. Because he says that children who have experienced this will approach the subject with a completely different mood of the soul when later it is taught to them in the form of intellectual concepts. So this is going to stick with them. They're going to understand it deeper, and they're just going to understand it on a much more soulful and spiritual and more feeling level. One of the reasons why I love this so much is because I always loved history as a child, but I didn't love history class necessarily. The dry facts and all of that stuff, it bored me and I couldn't keep up with it. I mean, I could keep up with it, but I don't remember any of it. But do you know what I do remember? I could probably tell you every plot of every Little House on the Prairie book. And to me, that was historical fiction. Were there different areas in there that might have been amended? Absolutely, but I remember it. And then moving further in that, like probably ages 11 and 12 and 13, still in that 7 to 14 range when you're learning with your feelings, I fell in love with books by Anne Rinaldi. And I still love those books and I still think about them all the time. And they were also historical fiction novels. Like the book A Break with Charity was a story about the Salem witch trials. And I learned Salem witch trials because of that book. And so I understand the concepts on such a more feeling level because it connected with me emotionally at a time that I was developing that the most. So just think about that. Think about how you learn, and dry facts are not as appealing as a story being told. Rudolf Steiner even says, like, through history, if you're going to be teaching history in that 7 to 14 range, he says the outstanding people of history, life stories of great men and women, allow these to determine the conscience and the direction of the mind. So when you're teaching history, bring about those biographies, and this way you can tap into the feelings of the people who lived in that time period, and the children will remember it and live with it so much more than if we just dryly tell them the facts. In fact, the story that I'm going to be showcasing for you, we do every Friday. We have a group that we meet up with, and we do the Exploring Nature with Children curriculum. It's not a Waldorf curriculum. I think it probably falls more into maybe Charlotte Mason, but we have a group that we meet up with every Friday, and it's a beautiful group. It's a beautiful experience. And I've been helping my friend who runs the group, and I guess it was a couple weeks ago, I was in charge of, we learned about clouds, and we were studying clouds, and we were studying how clouds formed. So basically the water cycle. And I created a story with songs, to really engage the children's hearts. So I'll be showcasing that story for you in another video. But it's science that I then turned into a story with songs. And guess what? My children have been singing those songs. So it's touching them on an emotional level. And I can tell because even my son will then sit down, he sits down with all of the props that I have, and he tells the story again, which is really cool. So it's teaching, they're learning on a deeper level, which is amazing. So really, that's all I really wanted to talk about today. Oh, one more thing I wanted to talk about. Repetition of stories, especially in those young ages. You don't need a new story for every day. Coming up with stories is hard work. It's not an easy thing to do. Like I said, I like to include stories that have songs to it. I have props with them. That takes work and effort. And because of that, I don't tell a new story every day. Instead, what I do is I stick with the same story for 3 to 4 weeks. The children don't ask me for a new story. Instead, they're picking up different things every time you tell the story. So my children are younger. When the kids get a little older, I'm sure, and we don't have the props anymore, the stories will probably not be as repetitive. But for right now, it's okay. It's absolutely encouraged that your stories are repeated, so that this way the children understand them more and more every time you tell the story. So I hope this was helpful to you. This is, like I said, it's one of my biggest areas of development for this upcoming school year. It's something that I'm really pouring myself into. I'm making puppets right now that are pretty much like standard puppets that I can like just re-accessorize based on each story. I'm really looking into which stories I'm going to be using, which fairy tales I'll be using, and later I'll most likely catch up with you on all of that. And if you are looking for ways that you can catch up with me, and you're looking for more ways to bring Waldorf education into your home, you can find me here. So you can like this video and you can subscribe to my channel and go check it out for more information on Waldorf education. And you can also find me over on my blog, on my website, which is beautifullighthome.com. And you can also find me on Instagram at beautifullighthome. I also have an Etsy shop. Some things are not Waldorf education related at all, but I do sell like homeschool calendars and things like that on there if you're interested on checking that out. So on Etsy, it's just beautifullighthome.etsy.com. So I appreciate you following and watching along today. I hope this was helpful, and I can't wait to talk to you again soon. Thanks so much. Have a good one.